It was a budget statement that never mentioned Brexit, but felt largely dictated by it. For all his attempts to sound upbeat about improving public finances, Chancellor Philip Hammond kept the austerity handbrake firmly on, saying every penny of extra spending would be balanced by tax increases. The main headlines: an extra £2 billion over the next 3 years to try and address the crisis in social care and ease the pressure on NHS beds. But just £400 million more will go to the NHS itself to help make services more effective and put GPs into accident and emergency departments. There's cash for more free schools and to help repair existing schools, and new T-levels will be introduced to improve technical and vocational education. For businesses, there's a £400 million package to help small firms cope with the revaluation of business rates, including a £1,000 discount for most pubs. But self-employed workers earning more than £16,000 a year will face an increase in national insurance payments to bring them closer into line with employed people. And there's a cut in the tax-free dividend allowance for shareholders and directors of small private firms from £5,000 a year to £2,000. Together, these two changes raise around £4.5 billion over 4 years. Our political editor, Gary Gibbon, has our first report tonight from Westminster.
Saving for a rainy day, Chancellor!
Left to himself, Philip Hammond wouldn't have been having this budget at all. He wants fewer big moments like this. His team even discussed doing away with the red box. He thinks the theatre of the moment forces chancellors to interfere more than they should. And he doesn't mind playing up to his image as a low-key, no-frills chancellor.
I turn now, Mr Deputy Speaker, to the OBR forecast. This is the spreadsheet bit, but bear with me because I have a reputation to defend.
Philip Hammond rattled off forecasts from the Office for Budget Responsibility with very slightly improved numbers on their last stab at this 4 months ago. These sorts of revisions over the last 6 budgets and autumn statements more often have meant more borrowing is required to stay inside the fiscal rules. When George Osborne got a windfall from a forecast change 18 months ago, he splurged the money. Today, with an even bigger change in his favour, Philip Hammond refused to do that.
Some have argued that lower borrowing this year makes a case for more unfunded spending in the future. I disagree. Britain has a debt of nearly £1.7 trillion.
The Chancellor didn't want to say it in front of Tory backbenchers, some of whom have longed for Brexit negotiations all their adult lives. But he thinks those talks will rock the British economy in the months to come, and he might need the extra headroom. On business rates in England and Wales, there was a 1-year discount for pubs to ease the pain of business rate rises, as part of a package of measures worth £500 million. Some Tory MPs have been looking for double that figure. And there was more money for social care in England to ease the crisis there, and the government hopes ease the pressure on NHS beds and budgets too.
Today, Mr Deputy Speaker, I am committing additional grant funding of £2 billion to social care in England over the next 3 years. And the government will set out its thinking on the options for the future financing of social care in a green paper later this year. For the avoidance of doubt, Mr Deputy Speaker, I would like to make it clear that those options do not include, and never have included, exhuming Labour's hated death tax.
To pay for the social care cash, Mr Hammond risked breaking this general election pledge made 2 years ago.
No increase in national insurance, no increase in national insurance, what it says right there on that pledge card.
Government aides said that pledge only ever applied to Class 1 national insurance for employees, something the government said it made clear after the general election in its legislation. It didn't apply to the more generous Class 4 national insurance paid by self-employed people.
The difference in national insurance contributions is no longer justified by the difference in benefit entitlements. Such dramatically different treatment of two people earning essentially the same undermines the fairness of our tax system.
The awkward thing here for the Chancellor is that he has broken a manifesto commitment, but that it is the right thing to do. And now he's going to have to explain to people why he was wrong to make the promise in 2015, but he's right to make the change now.
They haven't exactly done that, have they?
No, that's hard.
Tomorrow's headlines may show Mr Hammond just how hard. Labour leader Jeremy Corbyn said the government had missed an opportunity to help the people Theresa May had promised she'd focus on.
When she took office, the Prime Minister said, if you're one of those families If you're just managing, I want to address you directly. This budget does not address them. It failed them. This budget has done nothing to tackle low pay, nothing to solve the state of emergency that persists for so many people demanding and needing health and social care now, and nothing to make a fair economy that truly works for everyone.
The most significant changes were things we already knew about, so day-to-day spending cuts on public services, cuts to welfare for working age families, cuts to income tax, cuts to inheritance tax. They all go ahead this April and are much, much more important in aggregate than the new measures we heard about today.
The government had already announced money for new schools, including grammar schools, and a new T-level technology qualification. And it had leaked some other announcements too.
I am delighted to use the occasion of International Women's Day to announce 3 additional measures. Well, not quite announce them, Mr. Deputy Speaker, because my right honourable friend, the Prime Minister, has already announced 2 of them.
It's International Women's Day.
It says here...
A little earlier at Prime Minister's questions, Theresa May made a show of laughing at Jeremy Corbyn's questions. Quite a few of her backbenchers tonight aren't seeing the funny side, as they've crushed the numbers on a national insurance rise some see as hurting traditional bedrock Tory support.
Well, in a moment, we'll be hearing from our business editor, Siobhan Kennedy. She's at a pub in Staffordshire. But first, a few more words from Gary in Westminster. Gary, how much of a problem is this national insurance tax rise for the government?
Might be quite a problem. Philip Hammond, remember, came to Parliament trying to put out 2 fires on the business rate and on social care, and he seems to have, in the process, started another one. There's been the 1922 Backbench Committee meeting tonight, and the dominant questions tended to be about this national insurance change. An awful lot of Tories feel it's potentially hurting what they would consider their sort of bedrock support, and I think you're going to see Tories supporting newspapers coming in alongside them. And remember, it was that alliance that started those fires that Philip Hammond was here to put out. So maybe yet again he may have to put this fire out and somehow maybe retrench, pull back a bit. What if he does want to field the questions he's going to be under? He's going to be doing a round of interviews tomorrow morning. He's probably going to have to do a bit better than one of his aides a little earlier, who, when they were questioned about surely this is a manifesto breach, said, oh no, the manifesto is not the place for that kind of detail, and also said that was before my time. Well, I think he's going to have to do a bit better than that, and there really is some pressure on this one.
Well, as we've heard, there was mixed news for businesses from the Chancellor, with help for some small firms struggling with higher bills from the reform of business rates, but a sizable tax hit from a cut in dividend tax reliefs for shareholders and directors, and higher national insurance contributions for many self-employed workers. Our business editor, Siobhan Kennedy, has this.
The local high street of Stone in Staffordshire. We're always being told places like this are the backbone of Britain's economy, a place for small businesses to thrive. But today, the self-employed people who own many of these firms got a surprise from the Chancellor they weren't quite expecting. Chris Andrew opened his salon in Stone 13 years ago using his own money. Today, he learned that Philip Hammond was increasing his national insurance payments.
It seems to me that the small man is constantly being hammered by central government. They want to make up a shortfall in taxation. Oh, I know, we'll go to the small businessman.
From next year, his contributions will increase to 10% and then to 11% the year after. And to make matters worse, the £5,000 he was allowed to pay himself in tax-free dividends has now been cut to just £2,000.
It feels as if we're constantly being hammered by Mr. Hammond.
Mr. Hammond would say, for the same amount of money earned, you are paying a lot less tax than somebody who is employed.
Why should I put my money on the line to set up a business? There has to be a return for my investment. Otherwise, I might as well just go out and buy a new car. You know, there are 4 people work here other than me. That employment wouldn't exist but for me.
Around 2.5 million self-employed workers, from stay-at-home graphic designers to hairdressers like Chris, will be hit with the increase that Mr Hammond's party once referred to as a tax on jobs.
If people like Chris had been taken by surprise by an increase in national insurance, then the Chancellor did at least try to soften the blow by providing assistance for small businesses facing a sharp increase in business rates, though it wasn't quite the overhaul of the system that many had been hoping for.
I would love to expand my business and move into this so that I could have customers sitting in, but £18,000 in business rates.
Sandy Crook runs a small juice bar just off the high street. She wants to move into the centre, but the business rates are too high.
It's just going to be shops boarded up, and who's going to want to come to that? We need more footfall, not less, so that we can all make a bit more money.
And the subsequent increases will be capped.
The Chancellor said he was listening today, especially to pubs like the Royal Exchange, which faced a massive hike in rates next month after the rateable value of the property was increased by 334%.
The valuable role that local pubs play in our communities.
Owner Keith Bott welcomed the £1,000 one-off cut.
It's an immediate relief for 12 months, and that gives us time now to make our case and make them understand where the unfairness is. We can't carry out trade digitally in a pub. We have to be face-to-face. That's the joy of a pub, is people coming together to drink beer. But that means that we can't move our business away from the value of the property. The value of the property is everything to us. So the tax system needs to be fair.
So money off for him next year, but his bill will still triple within 5 years. And Mr Hammond found a £300 million discretionary fund for local councils to help the hardest hit. Not exactly an overhaul of the rate system that rewards giants like Amazon while penalising pubs like the Royal Exchange. For that, the Chancellor said more later this year. I'm joined now live in the Royal Exchange by the owner you saw there in our piece, Keith Bott. Now, Keith, you're obviously pleased at the relief you got on business rates today, but still, over the 5-year period, you're getting clobbered, aren't you?
Yeah, we are. And what's great about today is the government have listened and realised that there's a problem, and they've dealt short term with that problem. But the key thing for us now is to make sure that going forward we have a fairer system that allows pubs to prosper and people to come together and enjoy beer in fabulous pubs like this.
But will the increase that you have to pay, which is something like 200% nearly in the 5-year period, would that potentially stop you from investing, from expanding your pub chain?
Well, I think we need some certainty, and we need to understand how business rates are going to be calculated in the future. That will help us to invest. We want to invest. We want to open more pubs like this, but we can't do that if costs keep getting put up that are completely out of our control, and business rates are completely out of our control.
And what about the Amazons of this world? Are you happy about that situation?
Well, we can't trade digitally. You can't pass a pint of beer across the bar in a digital arena. So we have to trade in the properties that we operate, and that means that we've got to have a fair system for taxing those properties.
OK. Jackie Bennett, you run a cookware store down the road in a gift shop. You're also getting hit by the increase in business rates that you think they were going to fall today, but actually they've risen for you.
Unfortunately, yes. I was under the illusion that I was going to get a reduction in my business rates, but I've had an 11% increase.
An 11% increase?
11%, which will be capped, but it's still an increase, which I'm not happy about.
And then, Jackie, there's a double whammy for you because you're self-employed. How much of a shock was that increase in national insurance contributions for you today?
Something I wasn't expecting. But and as well, I've also got the living wage rise increase, which affects me, and that's the second wage rise in 12 months. So, again, it's something that's going to be a challenge for 2017.
So do you feel that small businesses like you have been unfairly penalised today?
Oh, very much so. It needs a total review of the rating system. All they've done is made minor changes, and they're not effective.
They're not effective?
Not in mine.
What are you calling for then? Do you want a complete overhaul of the system?
Absolutely. That's what they said they would do 2 years ago, but they haven't. All they've done is put sticking plasters on what's there already and change the appeal system so that you can't appeal, otherwise you've got no chance.
Jackie, Keith, thank you very much. I think you can hear there the mixed views. People like Keith are obviously happy at the relief they've been given, but there's a definite sense, John, that the Chancellor needs to do more. And where Philip Hammond gave on business rates, some of those very same small businesses like Jackie here are being penalised by the increases in national insurance contributions. And remember, it's the increases in those contributions. The Chancellor wants these very same small businesses to continue spending, to continue growing, to fend off the uncertainty he sees coming from Brexit. Back to you.
Well, so often with the budget, the devil is in the details, with facts often passed over in a single sentence from the Chancellor, emerging later as significant changes. So is this the same story in the Chancellor's last spring budget? Our business correspondent, Helia Ebrahimi, has been combing through the Treasury's Red Book and joins us now. So what's the answer to that question, Helia?
Well, it hasn't taken very long because this is a small budget, politically small, but fiscally tiny. You know, they may call him Spreadsheet Phil, but you could fit his policy decisions on a Post-it note. And because the budget is so thin, it's really important to look at this in the context of the government's spending plans across the whole of Parliament, because that's when you start to see who in society is really being hurt. For example, compare all the welfare cuts that are to come to the triple lock afforded to pensioners, some of the richest people in society. So all this talk of helping the just about managing, well, not a lot has been done today.
So why has he done so little?
In budgets, we often talk about giveaways versus takeaways. That means, has the government taken more in taxes or is it spending more in services? And you'd be forgiven for thinking, like Jackie said, that the Chancellor has actually given money away in the first 2 years. But like every politician, he gives with one hand and with the other he takes away, because in the last 3 years of his budget, he's actually raiding national insurance and company dividends to pay for this. And why is this? Because fundamentally, the government doesn't think the UK economy is doing that well. So on the face of it today, the deficit number was brought down by £6.5 billion. That looks like good news. But actually, let's take a step back. Because in 2010, George Osborne actually promised that by 2015-2016, the budget deficit would have dropped to £20 billion. But hang on a moment. Last year, the budget deficit was actually closer to £72 billion. And today, we can see that the deficit is actually going to go up next year. And if you scroll forward, it's not till 2021 that you ever get to that £20 billion figure. So it's not great news, and it's even worse when you compare it to the budget we had last March, where we're now more than £100 billion in the red.
So given the government's track record on deficit reduction, what are the chances of this projection being met?
Well, I think forecasting is a fool's game. Probably 2016 proved that. But what you need to pay down debt is a growing economy. And today, the OBR did upgrade UK growth. They upgraded it to 2%. But very much like the deficit, if you fast forward, the picture starts to look a little less rosy, because subsequent years you can see that growth is actually coming down. And this is really important because the OBR has actually sidestepped much of the discussion about what's going to happen in Brexit discussions and how that could possibly derail the UK economy. It's also not touching on the fact that the UK consumer, people that have been driving this economy, have started to show some signs of weakening.
Well, we're joined now by the Treasury Minister, Jane Ellison, and Labour Shadow Business Secretary, Rebecca Long-Bailey. First, Jane Ellison, do you accept that when people read not once, not twice, but 5 times in your election manifesto that there wasn't going to be a rise in national insurance, they might have been under the mistaken belief that there wouldn't be a rise in national insurance?
Look, we said that we wouldn't increase income tax and national insurance. We said that, and then we went on to legislate in 2015 on the tax lock, and we made it clear in that legislation, Class 1, which is the class paid by the vast majority of people, employees and their employers, we made it clear that that was what was included in the tax lock. At the same time...
Well, hang on a minute. I went through 20 tweets from Conservative Central Office on your official Twitter site. 20 tweets, not one of them mentioned Class 1 or Class 4. national insurance
Class 1
was
is
the
the
issue.
one paid by the vast majority of people, 85% of people who are employees. We then went on to legislate, as I say, in the House of Commons. In fact, you know, Rebecca was involved in that on the Bill Committee and led for the opposition. And in fact, that tax lock bill was passed without opposition. So we made it very clear then what we were doing. We were looking at Class 1. We also made it clear that we'd asked we'd asked the Office of Tax Simplification to look at Class 2 and Class 4. And we've subsequently, of course, announced the abolition of Class 2
Now, this is
NICs.
after you've told voters, we will not, and you heard David Cameron say at the top of our programme, we're not going to raise it.
Well,
you
in fact, we're cutting Class 2 NICs. The abolition of Class 2
I'm
NICs...
sorry, but either this is a promise or it isn't. And, of course, it brings politics into disrepute. You lied.
Well, we said that we would tackle income tax and NICs. We said what we'd do, and we then gave the detail in the tax lock bill, and we carried that through the
let's
House
just
Commons.
check. Were you fully supportive of this? You didn't oppose it?
No, I mean, and I think it is a clear breach of their manifesto commitment. But let's remember, they've got form for this. In 2010, the Conservatives said that they weren't going to reorganise the NHS. And then, as soon as they were elected, they carried out the biggest reorganisation.
Yeah, but the point the Treasury Secretary made is that you
space.
didn't really resist this when it got into Parliament, when they were talking about
We made a
this whole
number of
rafter.
comments, as Jane well knows, when we discussed this at Bill Committee.
But a
we
comment
raised
isn't a vote
concerns.
against, is
No,
it?
we raised a number of concerns.
But a
and we asked
comment
them
isn't the same
we
as a
asked them
vote
to look
against.
at a number of points because, quite frankly, this will be devastating for a lot of self-employed people. The Federation of Small Businesses have said that it undermines the government's own mission to develop a prosperous economy.
But Rebecca makes an interesting point raising the Federation of Small Business, because what the Chancellor explained today was that the differential between what people traditionally got for self-employed NICs and what they're getting in the future, that is changing rapidly. So, for example, the Federation of Small Business lobbied for self-employed people to qualify for the state pension. That's something that, as a result of the 2016...
Yeah, but fixing this after the horse has bolted, when you're committed to raising it, and these reliefs are not yet law, and they won't be.
But the gentleman and the lady who you interview in your film, for the first time, those people have got the security as self-employed people of knowing they're entitled to the state pension. That's worth £1,800 a year. This is a very, very significant benefit, but it's paid for out of national insurance, and it's reasonable and fair to ask that people should pay into a fund what they're going to increasingly get out.
Well, let's take you on then to the whole question of the first year since 2009 that you've had to increase borrowing. What's the problem?
Well, look,
where's things gone wrong?
Well, last autumn at the autumn statement, the Chancellor laid out the new fiscal rules. We're obviously in a different situation. He was very clear and straightforward about that. And in fact, the OBR's forecasts as published at this budget are broadly the same as they were last autumn.
The OBR is telling us we're going to be in deficit until 2025. That's austerity lasting until 2025.
But the Chancellor was very clear with the country last autumn that we have new fiscal rules. We are in a new situation. We've acknowledged, of course, that we face a degree of uncertainty going forward. And sensible people would say you have to allow for that and plan for it.
Do you support the borrowing increase? And therefore, are you too signed up to austerity till 2025?
Well, no, I think the government have made some very shoddy decisions. I think we had the picture painted of a very rosy garden today. We were told that growth was up, but when you look behind the figures, you'll see that a lot of that growth is based on consumer spending. Now, we're seeing inflation over recent weeks, which is going to put a squeeze on living standards, and people haven't seen their wages increase significantly since before the crash. The government has done nothing to provide businesses with the support to drive wages up. And even the British Chamber of Commerce today made comments about the lack of investment in today's budget
but I have got to
creating a
take you
fertile
back.
business environment.
I have got to take you back to what Jeremy Corbyn said when he got to his feet. He never mentioned the whole question of national insurance, which was an open goal. What's this leader of the opposition doing?
I mean, on budget,
what opposition is he providing?
On budget day, it's very difficult for the opposition
Well,
leader.
it's not difficult to say, hang on a minute, you lied about national insurance. He could just stand up and say, by the way, I have just noticed that you lied about national insurance.
He has seconds to respond to the budget, and we've come out in our media appearances today, we've made this a major issue because it is
may have done, but your own leader didn't.
And the NHS and social care. It was quite a worrying budget. But in terms of the business side of things, as I've said, the business rates issue didn't deal with the problem head on, and the self-employment national insurance contributions issue has put a lot of people who were self-employed into a state of crisis.
Well, let's get to Brexit, because Brexit was never mentioned in the budget. It's a rather large business, Brexit. You can say that in saving £27 billion, he's being a wise virgin. But at the same time, you would have thought you might spell out a few of the risks involved in. He's a Remainer, and therefore he must see glaring in front of him the realities of Brexit.
Well, look, John, the autumn statement the Chancellor was extremely clear about, as we were talking about
but this is
before,
the budget.
Yes, indeed, but I mean, I hesitate to say it, but I don't think anyone needs reminding about Brexit. It's a massive political issue. It's a big issue for the country.
But this is finance. We'd like to know the financial implications of everything that he can see.
But as I said
and he
to you
apparently
earlier,
sees nothing where Brexit's concerned.
Well, hang on. But as I said to you earlier, the OBR's forecast, which was very clear about, how they saw the impact of Brexit over the next few years, that hasn't substantially changed since the autumn statement. So to that extent, there were no new figures to comment on that. But what businesses I've been talking to since the autumn statement, I've been out and about, as I'm sure Rebecca is, what they say to us is, what we now need to do is really plan for the long term. What is going to drive resilience and productivity in our economy? Investing in skills, investing in productivity, investing in infrastructure, all things in which you've got big announcements.
Well, what about planning for the long term? What's Labour saying about Brexit and the risks to the British economy?
Well, I think there was a gaping hole in today's budget. I think the takeover of Opal Vauxhall has highlighted a number of issues that the government should be tackling. There was the supposed Nissan deal, which we still haven't seen the letter from the government, but we've heard that one of the principles in that was to provide funding and support to reshore
when
supply
are we going to see
chains.
Brexit? When are we going to see the Labour Party coming out with a coherent view of what Brexit is going to do to the British economy? When's Labour going to spell it out?
Well, in light of what I've just been discussing, John, we want to see the government put its money where its mouth is in terms of investing in our automotive industry and supporting the reshoring of supply chains. If it all goes wrong and we don't get access to the single market, because there are whole industrial sectors now in a state of crisis, worried about their future and not taking long-term investment decisions.
Thank you very much indeed, Rebecca Long-Bailey, and thank you, Jane Ellison, indeed. Thanks for coming.